Welcome to Camp Confidential, Beyond the Bars. I'm Katrina McLarin, and with my co-host Cheryl Womack, author, entrepreneur and philanthropist, we tell it like it is. In Season 1, we take you inside the walls of a women's federal prison camp. From pre-sentencing to navigating daily life behind bars, we offer practical advice, survival strategies and insights that no one tells you before you go in. No sugarcoating, no cliches. This podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only. Be sure to do your own research and consult a professional. Today's episode, Ed-DUH-cation, is based off the book How to Go to Camp, Surviving in a Women's Federal Prison by the Cheryl Womack. Now that's available on Amazon. Now, Cheryl, what was the purpose of the name?
There were so many things that were oversimplified or dumbed down in the education department that it's like, duh. What are you saying? Answering this question, or why did you need that? Or why are we going to class? Or it seemed like a very backward program, even though I don't think that a GED class necessarily has to feel or be that way, but this one did. And so it's just sort of like the education department to me wasn't great. It wasn't horrible, but it wasn't great. And so it irritated me at the lack of interest and enthusiasm in it. And it's just sort of like, we're just going through the motions at Ed-DUH-cation.
So tell me, what educational opportunities were made available to you while you were in prison?
The only thing I could do, I think, would be to do things for myself that I would do when I'm not in prison. And that's read books, read the Wall Street Journal. I mean, because I'd already owned a business and done the things that I'd done in my life, I didn't see the point of getting a master's or a PhD while I was there and paying for it through whatever system or online college program there was. So for me, it was more important to see how I could help other people.
And do you feel, is that one of the reasons that led you to actually becoming a teacher while you were there?
Absolutely not. No, they came and asked me to be a teacher. I did not volunteer for that job. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I think I wanted to have something more active. And I was also hoping to have something that started later in the day when this first started, because you had to be there and ready to go at 8 o'clock in the morning. And even though you have to be up and awake at 7, nobody says you're really awake at 7. They came and said, we hear that you were a teacher. We hear you've ran a business. Would you come teach? And so I had 2 or 3 people approach me before I finally agreed to go over and see the CO of the program and take the class and agree to take a class.
So just to elaborate a little bit further, when you were in high school and into college, you actually did study to be a teacher. Is that right?
I did. And I actually taught for 1 school semester before I just didn't like the teaching system anyway that we had going on. And there's no way to catch the people that are falling through the cracks or help people excel who maybe went a little faster. There can be programs that do that. I'm not saying they don't exist, but in general, in the school systems that I worked through, there wasn't. And, so I took what I considered a terrible job when I was trying not to get a job in insurance. And when they interviewed me, I just said, I don't even know how to spell insurance, let alone what insurance does. But they were desperate for help, so they hired me. And
then look at the path that led you down.
Wow, it was fascinating. But I mean, it took a business side. And, when you find a part of something you love, like business for me, the other parts you'll make yourself learn and become easier and more interesting because they get you to the purpose of what you're trying to do.
So do you think it's quite ironic that when you go to prison and you go to this camp, that they're asking you to be a teacher and you're in effect going full circle back to your original employment?
I suppose so. I mean, I don't think I really saw it that way. I just thought it'll give me something to do. I'll do the job.
That's an important point, I think, is that whether you're teaching the class, like in your case you were, or whether you're an inmate looking for something to do, education or the classes that you can take can be very helpful in occupying your time. So it gave you a sense of purpose, do you think, while you were doing this?
I think more than initially, it gave me structure. You have a long day to fill. You don't have, in normal life, you have interruptions and other people interacting in your life and things going on. And here, you just have the monotony of every day and the same things happen every day. It's like Groundhog Day. It's just a repeat, go, rinse, repeat, go. And so this was a way to put something else in, even though it was going to be the same every day. The classes I taught, I thought I could do something different with. Like, when I went in and did the first social studies class, I asked the class, what's one thing, anything they'd want to know about social studies or history ever in the world they wanted to know. And I would find out no questions were off. And they all wanted to know what U.S. presidents had venereal diseases. That was my opening day.
And these were GED classes, right, that you were teaching?
Yes, there are GED classes because the federal prison system requires you while in prison to attend and work toward getting a GED. They have goals and incentives for the COs and for the people in prison to pass a GED, but because it's programming and things that you can do. And often your judge has ordered in your court order that you get a GED while you're in prison as well. So you usually have it coming from two ways, that to meet the conditions of some of the things you have to do in prison, you have to get a GED, or you at least can't say you have to get a GED because you may never pass, but you have to shoot toward getting a GED.
So for those that might be listening or watching outside of the United States, the GED is basically the equivalent of a high school diploma. Is that what it is?
That's correct. And honestly, in this day and age in the United States, so many people are homeschooled that you have probably, I'll bet you have 50% of the United States population now with kids passing GEDs from homeschooling as opposed to getting a high school equivalent.
So while you're in prison, you've got GED classes that people have to take if they don't have it. Then I'm assuming you have other types of classes that can be inmate-led, that are inmate-led. What type of classes are available to other inmates for those that have already got their GED, for example?
Well, they had nighttime programming classes, and I think we talked a little bit about this, where you could teach a class on where that you'd show videos on the planets, and they'd be like those old 60s machines that would come out and run a video, on a VHS to show, and on a screen or on the board that would show you some information about planets and what different planets did. So they'd go through that kind of stuff. And they had one class, but it didn't last. It was just there one semester while I was there, but it was on family parenting. And to me, that seemed like a good class. You could take a Spanish class if enough people signed up for the class. I taught entrepreneurism, and those were full classes. And you could take a class on, but you could take classes on needlework, so that you could go in with somebody and learn crocheting. A lot of people crochet in prison. A lot of people crochet. Not as many needlepoint, which is my preference, but a lot of people learn to crochet.
So you can't just decide one day, okay, I'm going to go teach a class. There must be a process. How do you go about maybe developing what class it is you want to teach, and then how you get that approved?
Well, so if you think you have a knowledge like the entrepreneurism that I volunteered to teach, I basically put together an outline of a syllabus of what I would do and what 10 weeks worth of classes would look like, what they'd be about, how many kids I thought should attend, and what our end result should be. Like, I wanted us to write business plans. And so our final goal was to write business plans. And you present that to the CO of the education department, and you go hand it to them, and then they reach back out to you and say, I'll put it up for sign up. And if at least 10 people sign up, so they have a sign up time that happens at the beginning of each semester for all the nighttime classes. And everybody goes and signs up, and then half of them don't show up. Maybe more than half of them don't show up. But everybody signs up like they're going to go to everything. And so you have your class, and if at least 10 people come and stay in the class, then you have a class.
Were there any limitations you think about eligibility requirements around classes or anything like that?
For the nighttime programs, no. I mean, again, they were more fillers, something to give other people to do. And especially when you first got there while you're trying to figure out what to do, it was a good thing to do, to go to. I mean, I signed up for 2 or 3 of them, and some of them were so bad and so boring that you just, after a couple of them, quit going. And you could see why they didn't keep their 10 people. And some of them were not bad, interesting. So, and they might give you a test at the end, and you really didn't care. But for people who needed to earn time off, good time off, who might really have a lot of time, it's called programming when you take these classes and you get certificates. And so for people who are in there for a long time, programming is a very important thing to do.
Like when they go before a parole board, you're saying you can get good, that can be taken into consideration.
It's one of the things they take into consideration. Are you spending your time usefully and helpfully while you're in prison to improve yourself? And so obviously the more certificates or things that not just you've signed up for, but things that you've completed, the better off you'll do in front of your parole board.
Well, that puts a completely different spin on things. It's not just a matter of occupying time now. It's also that you're, heading towards trying to get out a bit sooner by attending these and finishing them off. So let's go back a little bit to the GED requirements. Why do you think the government places such a strong emphasis on getting your GED, as does the court system, as making it a requirement that you have to do?
Well, I think society at large thinks that you should have at least a high school diploma or a GED equivalent. I mean, I think society has put a lot of pressure on people having college degrees, going to college. I think that's changing. I think that society now realizes they probably should have put just as much emphasis for a number of people to learn trades as opposed to get a GED. I mean, you could be in woodworking or plumbing or, electrical or something like that, and get a skill set where you could make as much money or more than people who have college degrees. And it's something that you enjoy and are more suited for. So I think societally that's changing, but that's not something that's changed in prison, that you still have to go toward that GED.
Do you think there was issues there of genuine issues of people having literacy problems? Was that addressed in prison at all? Because not everyone, and it's sad to say, but not everyone can read and write.
That was the hardest part of all, because you have these grown women that I always refer to as my kids, who are the average age of 50 in my class. And, the thing I've noticed and figured out the first day was that they didn't understand the meanings of, I'm not going to say the simplest words, just words, that you would read in the GED program. So we go through and read it, and somebody'd stand up and go, I don't know what that word is. And I was so thankful for that girl to say that, because historically what they do is they give you the book and either you read it yourself, hopefully you can, or you read it aloud with the instructor and answer the questions at the end. So again, if you've got a whole group sort of doing this, you're probably really not getting into any discussions on it. What does it really mean? How would you apply this information? You're not teaching, you're just rote reading. And, I can't learn that way. Maybe some people can, but I couldn't learn that way, so I didn't teach that way.
Were there any classes in prison that addressed the ability to read or write, the basic fundamentals? Because I'm unsure how you could pass a GED if you couldn't read or write, and yet it was a requirement.
I think that you probably could get a tutor. I think on occasion I've seen somebody who couldn't read very well get a tutor and start learning to read. But you'd have to work that out on yourself to go figure out how to read, or work with your teacher after class and try to figure out how to get some time to learn how to read. And if you think the reading was hard, going to the math or science would have been even more difficult.
Well, and the other thing you've mentioned previously is that the materials that you had to work with were actually quite out of date. So
Right.
It wasn't necessarily what was going to be on the test, right? If you ended up doing the test outside of the prison.
Right. So if you're doing the test outside the prison, the material might have a little more current political events or things like that it referred to, that if you really needed something to jog your memory for where does this fit in, you wouldn't hear that. So again, if you start getting your GED while you're in prison, I suggest you finish it, because you will have different material when you get out. You just will. And again, it's just, I think, understanding things literally to where I talked about, if we had the Bill of Rights and we went through them, I could bring the Wall Street, and legislation could be being passed in Congress, and I could talk about it in the class and how it fit into the Bill of Rights and what did that mean, so they could see some real life examples. I mean, we would talk about what our rights were and what does freedom really mean. And when you go through all the things of, when you came into my prison, I wanted you to be in a place where you didn't feel like you were in prison. You felt like you were in a classroom, in a void away from the rest of it, because nothing else was going to come in and bother you while you were in there. So what can we do to make that better? And so we laughed and we got in trouble because we were loud. I was loud anyway. So, we would get in trouble for being too loud, too happy, because the other classes would be falling asleep and leaning over and trying to read their books and stuff. And it just, I don't do things that way.
God forbid you should enjoy your education.
Duh. That's why it's like, it has to be boring or it's not good. For a lot of these guys, they had government jobs. They'd been there a long time, or they're with the private BOP. They'd been there a long time. They're in retirement years, and they just didn't want to put the energy into it. Now, they wanted to meet their goals, but what's the best way to meet your goals? Put a little energy into it.
Yeah, a little bit of a catch-22 on that one. So do you feel like any of these programs actually prepared inmates for employment or entrepreneurship?
No, certainly not. No. Well,
That's the short answer.
I hope my entrepreneurism class help them prepare for thinking about if they could start a business or what they could do. If nothing else, I hope it gave them more confidence. Again, even in my social studies class, I would have them stand up in front of the class and draw circles and have them go through and explain the things, sort of giving a mini presentation, which at first, you're talking 10 people, and they were petrified to get in front of 10 or 5 people and do a presentation. And they learned to do it, which those are skill sets that you're going to take the rest of your life and be able to get up in front of people and talk. So there are so many subtle little things you get by presenting the right kind of atmosphere besides just the information in the GED that I think prepares you for life after prison and in the workforce.
And you were obviously encouraged to teach an entrepreneurial class which I do find quite ironic when you're not allowed to discuss business in prison. How does that work?
I think that's crazy. It's like, so I can sit and teach you how to have a business. I can watch you all run a business, but I couldn't tell you what you could do to improve your business, nor you talk to me about what you could do to improve your business, because we can't talk about business. The rules make no sense. Why do you wear men's clothes in a women's prison? I mean, the rules make no sense.
I understand that they obviously don't want inmates conducting business on a daily basis, but as you've clearly demonstrated, they do, because the prison's full of entrepreneurial women making food, selling food, altering clothes, doing all sorts of enterprises, laundry, hair, and they ask you to do an entrepreneurial class. And where's the line drawn? How far can you go on how to set these women up to run their own business? Where's the line?
Well, I mean, those women could have come in with those businesses and we could have done a business plan on those businesses. Now, some would come in if they were in like the dog program and they would want to come out and set up, a pet daycare or some sort of veterinary, something if they could eventually get there where they're working inside, something that had to do with walking dogs or taking care of dogs. And that was probably the easiest one that came along. People could have come in and said, I'm knitting and crocheting and I'm doing all of these things and I'm going to go home with hundreds of items and what would I do to sell them? And we could have talked about that. So again, you could have talked, you could talk about those things, but to talk about high-end loan on my house got me a shot because they didn't believe that could be the amount of a loan on a home. You're like, stupid. There's a lot of things that just make no sense when you're in prison.
So do you think the education, in effect, affected people's mental health, your mental health?
The other thing I liked about being in the education department early on is that I had kids in the RDAP class program as well as in the regular. So I met kids from all over the camp. That was nice because you didn't just meet people in your dorm. So you became more affiliated with more people. I think it made you feel good about yourself. I would have girls, I'd have them learn to write paragraphs. And one of the things you have to do for a GED is you have to write an essay. And it has to be so many sentences, so many paragraphs. And so again, we would just start small by writing some simple things until pretty soon before they realized they had these paragraphs to do, they were writing about stuff. There's lots of ways that you could back into it. And it gave me great joy to see people feel good about themselves. One of the girls in one of my classes said she wanted to teach history now after she'd been through the classes, that she didn't realize how much she found government history so interesting, that she really enjoyed it. It got to where a lot of the girls would come and find me on the campus and want to know when something was happening in politics or with government law, what did it mean? And I became a very reliable source for interpretation, whether it was in the paper or magazine or what have you, because I could look at it and go, that's not what that says. Let's read it again. And so we'd read it all the way through. And I think they appreciated that. It was good news or bad news, but it is what it is. And you need to learn to do this for yourself.
So the great thing is that the actual class itself, whilst it mightn't have turned you into a business empire entrepreneur on the outside, it did promote the students thinking beyond the classroom and having those discussions outside of that room, which I think is great. That they continued to think about it and they were stimulated enough to do so.
Well, made them feel good. Again, I had kids complain to me and say, gosh, in all my classes in the other prisons before I got here, all we did is sit and read the damn book and then have to take a test on each chapter. And I didn't know what it said and blah, blah, blah. Now we're exchanging and having an exchange of ideas and maybe even not always agreeing on the ideas, which was also okay because you won't necessarily agree on everything. So then you learn to respect each other's differences of opinions. And so, again, I think a lot of them enjoyed that part and enjoyed just thinking.
So do you think that helped you in a way too? Did that translate for you when you were back on the outside as such, that it gave you a greater understanding of the people and the types of people that you might run into in your life? Taking on other point of views because you were so used to running everything and being the head of everything.
Well, and I still used to running everything and being in charge of everything as best I could be. But I think to learn that if you had a problem with drugs early in life, you might be stumped for your educational ability and your thought process. And the only way that can be improved is by helping somebody think and start working that part of the brain and having those experiences. That was eye-opening for me. Again, you meet people who are completely sober and off of any kind of anything, and you're meeting the real essence of the person. So you could see real people instead of people who got in trouble to go to jail. And that made me very sad. It still makes me very sad because they're really good people who are addicted. And my frustration with education and everything else that happens in that prison is that I don't see what they're doing long term that's really helping those people handle their addictions. I mean, I just don't see it. And that's very frustrating for me because it's like, I don't want them to get out and come back in. And I can tell you matter of factly that I have several girls that I've talked to who got out who are already back in. It's the number one way. I mean, now let's say you may not be on drugs. You might be at a party where there were drugs. You're on paper. You can't be there. Let's face it, whether you're on paper or not, if they come bust someplace for drugs, you're all going in. You all might go to jail, period. So you don't have to be on paper to get in trouble for being somewhere where there are drugs, the wrong kind of drugs.
If you had a mandate to create your own educational program in prison, what would you focus on?
I mean, I would do what I did. I think that I would want to start with social studies where we talked about government, we talked about history, and I want you to understand how, I mean, these girls suddenly learned that if you came in as an immigrant, you came in legally and you came in through Ellis Island, you paid $20 or $40 to get off the island to get into the United States. And if you had so much as a cold or the flu, you didn't get off the island, even if you died, until you were healthy. People didn't understand how regulated those things were when people were coming in and saying, oh, we're all made up of immigrants. Well, those people went through hell to get in and get in legitimately. So we'd have lots of conversations about immigrants and legal and what's not legal. And, you know, I tell them my dad was a legal immigrant, so I'm struggling with the illegalness of it. But I think it's also good to have conversations people don't agree so that you can learn how to respectfully disagree and not become enemies.
I read from the notes too that while in prison, you read something like 50 books while you were in prison. Because you didn't really find stimulation in educating yourself further because you'd already sort of achieved what you felt. And at the time, you're 68. So you feel like you've achieved where you need to be.
Right.
But yet I think if you read 50 books, you were still looking for stimulation. What type of books were you reading?
To be fair, if I had to go to sleep at 10 o'clock every night and I was used to going to sleep at 2 a.m, that panicked me. And so I made sure I started out with adequate books. And I started out with, I had sent in to start with political books and some business books, Rich Man, Poor Man, to refresh myself. I had numerology books sent in because I always thought that was fascinating and would talk to the other girls about it. And we'd all do our numerology and try to see what was supposed to happen in our life. But then I read a whole group of Outlanders, which is like 800 pages for 7 or 8 or 10 books. You know, and I was so impressed with myself that I got that whole series read. Amazing book. Never would have read it if I didn't have that kind of downtime. But I mean, it was just something that I'd read from like 10 to midnight or 10 to 1 o'clock in the morning every night, you know, to just wind down and, you know, calm myself. And you don't want to just sit there and think about where you are, what's going on. You can't make it better. It is what it is. So these are things that I did to entertain myself. And, you know, I mean, for my entire life, I've always bought business books or political books or tough to read books that challenged me, which I've done my whole life instead of fluffy books.
So that was a way, I think, indirectly, you just continued to educate yourself and keep up with the current state of play because it's not like you're on the internet.
No, I agree. I think that was a great way for me to, you know, if they had a new political book coming out or something, I literally went on Amazon and picked books in advance so that my assistant could send them in. One of you send an email and say, send another one, you know, because I'd get close to the end of one subject. And then I would just donate them so there'd be anything else inside prison besides smut books.
So tell me about the prison library. That leads us into there. So did you find that? Did you go in and get books from the library? What sort of content was in there?
Well, I tried, but, you know, they'd be pirate books and witchcraft, or they'd be mystery books where fairies and spirits and we would be at war. You know, they'd just be spiritual kinds of things, or a lot of smut, lots and lots of paperback smut, one after another. And I just thought, my gosh, why are you feeding this to these girls? If you're in here for 10 years, this cannot be helping. But, you know, there was a lot of smut available in there. And they are needed
it's
to
quite ironic because, you know, you just said in a previous podcast that if a woman flashed her boobs or something to a partner on a video chat, that would be a shot. Yet the prison library is full of smut.
Right. Or
in fact.
Or you can't give your spouse, you know, more than a peck when he comes in to see you or hold his hand or anything. And they were in high demand. And every girl in there who read those knew exactly. I mean, my bunkie read smut books all the way through. And I think she had interesting authors and they had pretty good subject matter and stuff. I think they were higher end smut books, but from all the way through her 12 months.
I suppose for anyone, it's like people have different coping mechanisms and whatever it takes to get them through. In this particular case, in a legal way that's not getting you a shot or...
Yeah. I mean, it's a different kind of escape. And so it is a nice escape because you could be needle pointing and you're still got your surroundings. It's like if I saw somebody really upset, like my bunkie, I might tell her, let's go work a puzzle, because you can't look for a puzzle piece and keep thinking about something that's making you really mad. You can momentarily think of it, but if you're really working the puzzle, you can't. And I think that's what reading does. It gives you an outlet in a way, whatever it is you want to read, to just escape where you are.
Well, you've already said on numerous occasions now that structure is really important in a prison environment and that sense of routine. So for someone that's in prison a long stretch, would you recommend people try to seek higher education and further education?
I mean, I think it's a wonderful thing for them to try to get a college degree, but you do have to make an application. Money's already tight and very difficult to come by, and you have to pay for it. Now, I have seen a couple programs now where the universities, and I'm not sure who the system, are funding part of it or all of it in some test markets. So it'd be wonderful if while you were in there, you couldn't get a college degree. Or again, I think there's a part to business that even if you're going to be a landscaper or you're going to be some sort of a contractor, you still have to have some other business skills. It'd be nice if there were other things that you could learn in there that said, what other things do you need? I mean, I think they should have a class where they're teaching you how to balance a checkbook, that they teach you how to use QuickBooks, that they just teach you some basic fundamental things in life that school still doesn't teach you.
Well, I don't know if it's the case in America, but certainly where I am, that we've taken away a lot of our classes like home economics and basic accounting and so forth. And indirectly, we're dumbing down our population, which is crazy. So I agree. I think that sounds like it would be a wonderful thing for helping people, because it's also going to, do you think it would improve upon the rates going back into society and not recommitting these same crimes to help break that pattern?
Well, it has to help you if you're going to go get a checking account or something, to be able to know how to balance a checkbook and have that conversation with the banker, as opposed to, can you help me? And I wouldn't put that just on prisoners, because when I was running Leading Women and did some radio talk shows, I would have women call in whose husbands were in the military and he had been killed. And she would say, I don't know how to balance our checkbook. My husband took care of all of this. What can I do? And you're giving them advice to go to the bank and ask for help. And if they won't help you balance a checkbook, find another bank. We need those programs. We need them for kids. By the time you get out of 8th grade, you ought to know how to balance a checkbook. That shouldn't be a hard thing. You ought to know about a savings account. Then by the time you're getting through high school years and stuff, if you want to have somebody do a simple will, like we're doing in our book, to come into prison, they need to understand that concept, and they can understand why that matters to them. Or, for example, again, I'm taking them to the doctors and the doctor's giving them written instructions on something. And first, can you read it? And second, what does it mean? And partly you have to get through being traumatized, whatever the information is, if it's hard news, then understanding what does it really mean. So on so many levels, further educating these people with basic fundamentals would transform their lives.
Thank you for listening to How to Go to Camp with Katrina McLarin and Cheryl Womack. For more support, check out the Women of Worth website, www.womenofworth.wow.org, where you'll find helpful resources, including Cheryl's books, Mummy Loves You Everywhere and How to Go to Camp, Surviving in a Women's Federal Prison. Whether you're preparing for the journey or supporting someone through it, remember, there's guidance, hope, and a community ready to help you navigate this path.